Hello and welcome to Media7, I'm Russell Brown. This is of course Anzac Week, and in this show we'll meet the man tasked with steering the first official history of New Zealand and the First World War. But first, when we last heard from independent journalist Jon Stephenson, he was headed to the scene of our present war in Afghanistan to pursue the stories he broke in this Metro magazine feature, Eyes Wide Shut. He's now Kabul correspondent for McClatchy, the third largest newspaper chain in the US. So what does a foreign correspondent in Afghanistan get up to? Here's a month in the life of Jon Stephenson.
Yes.
How are you?
Come on.
How are you?
Welcome.
How are you feeling?
Nice to see you.
I'm also against about night operations.
Yes.
If they are doing night operations,
Yes.
you should be cooperate with the defense ministers, with interior minister. They should cooperate
Yes.
in that. Our Afghan soldiers should search the house.
Yes.
Not American, not New Zealand, not British soldiers.
Yes.
This is one of the last operations the commandos undertook with New Zealand SAS supervision. We're told they were hunting for a Taliban commander northeast of Kabul, but they escaped a firefight with no casualties and killed 5 and found bomb-making equipment inside.
Many of these operations that the Americans and the international forces conducted were conducted on the basis of faulty intelligence. The information was wrong. So often these operations, they detained the wrong people, innocent people.
Increasingly, night operations like this one are Afghan-led, although on this raid, overall direction was given by special forces from New Zealand. But in the end, no charges were brought against the man being questioned here. Despite being disturbed in a frightening overnight raid, he and his family are entirely innocent.
How long before the security, the ANA and the AMP, can look after Bamiyan security without the help of the New Zealanders?
والا خب فعلا هم شما در نظر به حساب میبینید که به حساب اردوی ملی با پای خود استاد هست فعلا هم.
Turning now to another hotspot, we are covering Afghanistan. The top U.S. general there asking for calm after violent protests over the burning of Islamic holy books at a U.S. airbase.
Officials are in damage control after pictures surfaced showing American troops posing with the maimed corpses of Afghans.
Taliban militants opened fire on a delegation of senior Afghan officials Tuesday while visiting villages where a U.S. soldier is suspected of killing 16 civilians.
Taliban?
Taliban.
I don't know if these numbers will have it. Number 2,
Yep.
so that means 700.
Thanks to Annie Goldson and her team who provided us with the footage you saw there. It's from a documentary to be screened later this year on Māori television. Now, last time we saw you, you were pretty much self-funded and it wasn't easy. This time you had the resources of McClatchy. How much difference has that made to you?
Oh, it's made a world of difference. I mean, it's just fantastic. I sort of compare it to running through water in a swimming pool and all of a sudden being on dry land and being able to run free, unencumbered. I mean, it's fantastic. And what's really great is not just that they've got tremendous resources, but that it's an organisation that has very similar values to the ones I have.
It must also be gratifying for you to be doing this job, given some of what was said about you last year by people in power.
Sure. I mean, I think the people that know me, particularly in the industry, they know who I am, they know the standards I adopt and adhere to. But of course, it's you know, rather disturbing when the Prime Minister of your country comes out and makes statements about you that are, you know, untrue. The Chief of Defence Force claims that you weren't at a base, that you didn't interview someone that you said you would. I mean, essentially saying that you fabricated a story. I mean, very, very disturbing, defamatory comments. And that's the sort of thing, that, of course, that goes on the internet. And anyone can read it. So yeah, it's the sort of thing that can end careers, really. So it's nice that people don't accept and believe everything that they read at first glance on the internet.
You mentioned the McClatchy culture just now, and it does have, that organisation has a very strong reputation for the independence of its war reporting. It's won awards for that.
Yep.
And I wonder whether that is in part because it's still essentially a family company.
I don't know whether it's the family culture, but certainly they have some remarkable journalists there working for them. One of them, a guy that was the foreign editor, who's recently gone back to the field, Roy Gutman. This is a journalist of world stature, a guy that's won the Pulitzer Prize and just about every other prize in America, uncovered a lot of the death camps in the former Yugoslavia, wrote a book, A Witness to Genocide. Remarkable journalist, something of a mentor to me personally. You know, the boss that I report to, young guy, highly intelligent, you know, really, really enthusiastic about the job. And if you go into the McClatchy website, one of the first things that comes up on the page is truth to power. And certainly they've been at the forefront of a lot of the criticism of the so-called war on terror. Jonathan Landay, another journalist that I have the privilege to work with, he was the guy that debunked a lot of the weapons of mass destruction myths that came out of the White House prior to the Iraq War. So, you know, some fantastic journalists, very, very strong culture of holding power to account, and obviously that's something that I subscribe to strongly.
Well, and I'd say one intriguing thing is that they're the agency that supplies the stories for Stars and Stripes, the US military newspaper.
Yeah, one of them, not the only one. I mean, Stars and Stripes has its own staff, but they do take stories from McClatchy. So, yeah, it's kind of funny in a way. I mean, there are many ironies in the coverage of the war. I mean, I probably am known here as something of a enfant terrible when it comes to the New Zealand Defence Force. Recently in Afghanistan, I read a story, and if you read some of the comments that came out on the internet afterwards, they'd have you believe that I was sort of pro-American military stooge. So you know, you can't please everyone, and I mean, I think McClatchy plays it straight down the line.
Now, one of the stories you covered was the massacres near Kandahar, which I assume was one of the biggest stories that's happened since you've been there. You weren't the only one to report on it, and perhaps now we could look at the SBS Dateline report.
I want to find out more about this atrocity and to see for myself where the killings took place. I travelled to the Panjwai district, an hour's drive from Kandahar. It's a treacherous journey in the heart of Taliban country. When investigators first visited the scene of the killings, they were attacked by the Taliban. An Afghan National Army soldier was killed. I follow the steps of the man who came here on the night of March 11. I'm the first Western journalist to make it here. How did he die? Violence is nothing new in this country, but no one was prepared for what happened here on the night of March 11. I'm struck by her reference to more than one soldier being involved, a claim repeated by the brother of one of the victims.
امریکایان وتلی دي د خونې څخه دغه زما د ورور کوچنیان وایي چې ما ورته وکتله په سرای کې ډېر څراغان د امریکایانو په سرو کې لګېدله او د توپکانو په خولو کې په دغه کې هم څراغان لګېدله نو داسې اندازه نه وه چې 15 وه 20 وه هر څونه چې وه.
The massacre of 17 Afghan civilians has unleashed a wave of grief and outrage. A US soldier is now in custody, charged with the murders. Suspicion that there was more than one killer is now a view widely held in Afghanistan, spurred by comments from the president himself.
In 4 rooms, people were killed. Children and women were killed. And then they were all brought together in one room and then put on fire. That one man cannot do.
Well, John, that's Yalda Hakim's report for Dateline on SBS in Australia. You have some problems with this story. What do you think's wrong with it?
Well, I think there are a lot of things wrong with it, too many to go into in a program of this length, but particularly disturbing to me was the fact that she presented at the top of her item to the viewer as eyewitness testimony from people who were not eyewitnesses.
Which I must say is how I took it when I saw it. I took it as the words of people who'd been there.
Yeah.
You're saying they weren't there.
They weren't there, and they acknowledged that they weren't there, but it wasn't acknowledged at the top of the program. Those two people, one of whom was the guy who lost just about all his family, Haji Muhammad Wazir. He was dozens of kilometres away on the border of Afghanistan and Pakistan, and it was nowhere made clear in the program that he wasn't an eyewitness, and yet he was presented as saying they came into our house, they came and did this, they came and they. And of course the reference to they is to multiple shooters, the multiple shooter theory. Obviously,
as opposed to the one rogue US soldier that we know about.
Exactly. And of course, an incident of this nature where an American serviceman goes off the reservation, so to speak, and kills 17 civilians, most of them women and children, is serious enough. You don't need to inflame it, you don't need to exaggerate it as the Taliban did by saying he killed 50 people, and you don't need to present a narrative like the one Yalda Hakim appeared to present in the program, that there was evidence for more than one shooter, and essentially what I believe fudged the facts.
You also said in your story for McClatchy that you were the first Western journalists there on the scene, a different village, one of the two villages that were hit, Najiban. I didn't actually say that. That was put in by the editors, saying that, describing an attack that occurred while we were there, saying that a McClatchy reporter, the only Western reporter there. I mean, it wasn't important to me that I was the only person there. It was put in as a question of fact. But what I found sort of a little bit disturbing about Yalda Hakim's piece was that it seemed very much, it was entitled Anatomy of a Massacre. And it made a number of mistakes, factual mistakes. But what I found concerning also was that it was very much about the reporter as news, the dangers, Isn't
the treachery.
That the reality of television, though? Well,
maybe it is, but I think it's a bit of a sad reality. I mean, I sort of almost wondered when I watched it whether I was watching an episode of the ABC program Frontline. Brooke Vandenberg, travelling.
Well, before you go any further, perhaps we should look at the response from SBS, and we did. We got a response from Peter Charlie, the executive producer of Dateline. He said, "I fully stand by Yalda Hakim's report on the recent massacre of civilians there. In the range of interviews contained in her report, testimony from 3 eyewitnesses to the shootings was clearly identified as being separate from the commentary." He also said, "Video of hostility at the scene of the killings was clearly portrayed as file footage through Yalda's shift from a first-person perspective, and Yalda was the first Western reporter to visit the village of Al-Khazaib, a different location which, according to Afghan officials, no other Western journalists have visited since the killings." So, what do you make of that?
Well, I think it's once again fudging the facts. I mean, it's very clear that she presented Haji Muhammad Wazir at the top of the program and Mullah Baran, who I also interviewed, as eyewitnesses to what happened. And nothing in what he replied contradicted my comments that was not the case, that they weren't eyewitnesses. And it's sort of very disturbing, particularly because in the program she also goes on to point out that Karzai says there were multiple shooters, and of course Karzai was relying on the same people who are not eyewitnesses that Yalda Hakim relies on the program. So it's kind of like it's giving a sort of a narrative, or giving momentum and truth to a narrative which is almost certainly false. And of course a lot of facts yet to come in about the shooting, but I spoke to Karzai's chief investigator, who's also interviewed in Yalda Hakim's program. In that program, he says, "I'm guessing, but I think there's 1 or 2 accomplices." Well, when I spoke to him, he said no. I presented him with testimony from eyewitnesses that said that there were only one shooter, and he agreed with me. So it's a little bit disturbing that this narrative, I think, for political reasons, and perhaps in the case of some journalists for reasons of ego or for less altruistic reasons, was allowed to come out and push a false narrative.
That was but one, as we indicated in the opening track there, of a string of awful incidents. It does not seem to be getting any better in Afghanistan.
No, it's not. I mean, I think you asked me roughly 2 years ago on this program, what was happening in Afghanistan. If I remember rightly, I said, it's finished, it's over, it's lost. And some people said to me after that show, it was a big call because, it doesn't look like that. But, I'm more convinced now than ever that the situation is completely lost. I mean, the government does not have the support of the people. And, a government that doesn't have the support of the people cannot succeed, it cannot flourish. And if you look at the instruments that they have at their disposal, if you think of the government as the flat part of a table, the legs, well, you've got the army, the police, the intelligence service, the parliament, the judiciary, all those things are rotten, pretty much rotten to the core. And the only thing that's holding the table up at the moment is the international community, the Americans, the NATO forces. When they go, the government will collapse.
And just briefly, one of the things that McClatchy's allowed you to do is continue to pursue the reporting on the New Zealand stories that you covered for Metro. Is there more to come on that?
Yes, much more to come.
Well, we'll look forward to that. Thank you very much, Jon Stephenson. After the break, a new history of the war that helped define us.